Welcome back to the Performance Playbook. Today we've got Graham Tuttle. Graham, how you doing? Welcome to the podcast.
Wonderful. And we finally got the lighting set up. Brando walked me through the different aspects of lighting, and so I shifted my thing around. I don't have as clear of a camera as full of a head of hair, but you know what? When we do.
We'll save that for podcast too. We'll get you a wig and then we'll fix the lighting. Graham, just so the people know, can you kind of walk us through what you're doing and, why you've been, touted as the barefoot sprinter, even though you might have named yourself that?
Well, Keegan's the one who came up with that, ironically.
Yes, of course
As
he
far as
did.
what I'm doing, I really don't know. I still kind of figure that out each day. I think I'm finding excuses to go work out and afford the opportunity to go and just mess around in the gym. But historically, I've been a coach and trainer about 10 years going on in different forms, working with everyone from like youth athletes. And not, there are some people who really attract the like professional athlete affect, like, oh yeah, and maybe one day I'll have somebody who rolls up. But like I've had a handful of guys that are like either in NBA, not NBA, the like high level D1 or like European basketball or college football, or this is college athletes and touching the area of the NFL. But it's like at some point they're very, very few and far between. And once those guys find a spot, they refer their friends over, and it's like, all right, it's fine. Most of the people I work with are regular kids, regular people, regular parents. But maybe it's my own desire to be athletic that affects the way that I see these people or their potential or the type of people. Like for years I worked and I taught like youth athletics, so youth sports, like kids that were played sports. And so I didn't do any sport specific teaching, meaning I'm not like a basketball coach, but I would work with basketball players. And so a lot of the gyms I work at were very athletic focused, and so I got a good feel for that. But as I went through those kind of that experience of just being able to learn, because I grew up with very poor eyesight and very unathletic, and so I didn't have any of this like natural prowess and coordination. There was everything. I thought too much, and then everything was a little bit delayed in the eyesight. A few things people don't really think about is if you're wearing glasses that magnify things, everything. So I'm farsighted historically. Everything that you see is magnified. So I would. It's like if you look at underwater, the things are bigger. It would be one size, and then it would cross the lens, and it would just be bigger. And it's like, okay, now everything in my world is bigger, magnified. There's no depth perception because there's a difference, or there's this thick frame, and so you're not using your depth perception. And then all of a sudden, it's like you have to move, and you have this thing on your face. So there's a lot of stuff you don't really develop when you're running around as a kid with these like heavy, thick glasses on your eyes that then impact your overall sensorial capacity. I mean, there's a whole lot of like eyesight if you look at like what that really is. It's like an expression of a calm brain. But there's layers to that the development of a child. And so if you don't have those, then it's like, okay, well, I still have a lot of high energy and I need to get out and run and do certain things, but I don't necessarily have the coordination to do this in an attractive way. And so a lot of teachers just doubt or, figured I had ADD and just say, hey, you need to do whatever, take pills. And it wasn't until I started running track and cross country that really clicked. But not much coordination involved in mid long distance track and cross country. It's just go out and suffer and get a new pair of shoes. Then I rode in college, and then at that point in time, I was like, oh, well, there's lifting, and so I could do bodybuilding or powerlifting. I didn't really know what I was doing. I just kind of like slapped together some programs from T Nation and bodybuilding.com. And then, I just like eventually was like, well, I like working out and nothing else was working. So, applied to do I couldn't bear to be in a clinical setting of insurance-led physical therapy and nursing. Just well, I didn't really get the opportunity. Like that was, I scrapped at a bunch of different angles that seemed professional, and none of them really worked. So what ended up being the option was like, oh, there's a gym that works with athletes, and I got the foot in the door to go work there, and I fell in love, and then you just kind of like I used it as I would still work with coach classes and stuff, but I was taking the classes too. So the owner and manager. It's Kenny Apili. He's a huge mentor for me early on, and he he would coach the college classes. And so I would join in as, 23, 24, like learn how to sprint, learn how to do it. Because I would literally take all the classes and I would, coach better. So eventually I kept chipping away, kept taking the classes, kept learning. And so then I started writing the curriculum, starting to change and do it for the gym. And you kind of work your way up and you pick up some clients and you start to see some patterns in people where, the way I started picking clients up was realizing everybody hurts somewhere. And so I would ask, what hurts? And they go, my knees, my back. And that was always my, and some people like your introductory line, your pickup line at a party. My pickup line was, hey, what hurts in your body? And something always did. And so I started we always had the benefit of working kind of in conjunction with the physical therapy clinic at the gyms. And so I would learn a little bit from them, watch how they handle things, and then merge that with a little bit of the athletic stuff. And then I would get this kind of match where like, I was never really like injured enough. I was too stubborn and never injured enough, or like severely enough to have to go through surgery or in physical therapy, which now I have different perspectives on. But at the time, it was like, I always have low levels of like issues, so I'm learning from these people, but I always have high levels of aspiration. So I'm learning from like the high level athletes and Kenny and how he'd coach, and like the high level college kids that would come in. And so I'm like merging these two worlds because like I want to do this, but I'm stuck here. And so like I had to understand the physical therapy, but I wanted to understand how to sprint and jump. And so kind of created this little middle thing of like, well, how would a regular person learn how to sprint or jump and get back? And so then you start to pick together some of these basic levels of like, okay, well, there's a body awareness that has to happen, and you can't really do it if your feet are super stiff because there's all kinds of issues. If you imagine you couldn't use your hands, or your hands are balled up into a fist, you would lose so much action in terms of your overall the shapes you can make. Same thing with your feet. You should try to put these things together, and then there's an unfolding set of coincidences and events that I started to get a better feel for this, get better at coaching, get better at explaining this process. You develop a handful of philosophies around the body and what works and what doesn't work and what's possible. You start to see some success stories, and then you connect with some people. I realize that like I would like to do some of this stuff online, and you meet some people like Keegan Smith, who's on this podcast previously, but he was a huge coach and mentor, and he was, about the time the pandemic had happened, I transitioned most of my training to being outside, and was fortunate enough to be near a college, UNC Chapel Hill, that had a massive turf field, like a football field plus of just straight turf, and there was a whole track loop on it. And so I just started doing more running on the turf, and I would just felt like, I'm doing some stuff barefoot or minimalist shoes, and it's like, it feels good to do. So I just kept doing it. And he pointed out like, hey, that barefoot sprinting thing would like really hurt my feet. Like that's something you should like think about that and kind of really work on that. And it's like, okay, it's like, the barefoot sprinting. I was like, well, okay, and then it's like, okay, let's roll with it. And so then here I am now.
Yeah. Was there anything specific that kind of like got you into the barefoot movement? Like for me personally, I saw a Vivo Barefoot ad that kind of gave a spiel on why our shoes are bad. And then, because I was, like I told you before we started, like I was searching for anything to make my knees feel better, like 2% anything. Was there something like that kind of was like, ooh, I should try taking off these cushioned shoes?
So the ironic, and this is, I think, ultimately the saving grace for the messaging. If there's something I'm codifying over a lifetime of thought and introspection and coaching, I never really cared about the feet. It's like there's an obsession around feet and shoes that people have that is interesting in some regard. If you look back historically, what shoes mean to people in terms of status and protection and all kinds of like, there's a lot of psychological elements to shoes. And then of course you have the foot fetish thing, which is a very of all the things I thought I would be getting filled in my DMs, that's not something that, it's something else. I don't really have words for it. But my point is that the feet are a fraught subject in either people are disgusted by them or way too attractive to them. And if it's not one of those two, then it's about the shoes. You get sneakerheads. It's like, I don't know what it is, but, people don't obsess about belts or like shorts in the way they do about shoes. It's like you don't have limited edition belt releases. I mean, maybe you do, but like no one's out there like, oh, I got my wallet. It may be hats and shoes, but it's very strange. So, point is, what I cared about was being able to do the things. Like I just deeply felt insecure and awkward and uncoordinated as a kid, and as a young adult. Still, it was like I would try to jump, and I've always had high aspirations to be better than I am in some capacity. For what? this will tell you a lot. Like, it wasn't that my parents were super religious per se, like meaning it wasn't like we would go to church every Sunday and that was kind of part of it. And the spouse, I think a lot of people when they kind of go wayward in their own life, whether it's drugs, alcohol, challenging circumstances, and they have kids, they're like, oh, we can start fresh again. So they want to plug in back to something like some type of a consistent community that like espouses good values that would generally keep your kid out of jail and stuff like that. So a lot of people do. They pop back into church and like, okay. And so I was around that. It was familiar, and it wasn't like, but it wasn't something that was just, some people have these horror stories about like, oh, we did this when we were 7, we're never not allowed to drink soda or whatever. It's like that wasn't really the case. But what I found, I would just create these delusions. You actually call me a very delusional person if you're ironic, but I do think Stephen Pressfield talks about this a lot. He's a brilliant author, but he talks about like delusions are the only thing that actually get us forward, because if you don't, so for example, you start a podcast, there's a certain delusion you have to have, which is not like an illusion, it's a delusion, which is just a small sampling of the available reality. So like you have all these facts that you could objectively say, there's millions of podcasts. I'm going to cut that down and say, I'm going to do a podcast. And so there's a delusion of, I'm going to write a book, I'm going to open a business, that we all have to have at some level. And the people who are the most successful are deluded enough to think that they could do it, and eventually the delusion becomes reality, which is a crazy thing, but it's a lot of what happens. I would create these delusions of how the real world was. So I literally never asked my parents, what did you do when you were a teenager? What, did you do good or bad stuff? I just assumed my parents would never drink. They would never do drugs. They would never do X, Y, and Z. Like, I just imagined they were perfect. I'm like, well, if they were good, I would not. Of course, I'm going to do good too. I didn't miss a day of high school. I literally missed one day of school, one day in elementary school, and I perfect attendance the rest of all elementary, middle, high school. And like, I would just focus on like, I had straight A's. I just, for whatever reason, I would just create these kind of expectations that weren't, no one asked me to do it, but I was like, oh, well, this is just what you're supposed to do. And so then I would like make up my bed every morning. Everything was clean and organized. And in some capacity, I do think a little bit of that was because my brain was always very creative and kind of all over the place and a little bit sporadic. And if I didn't have an outlet, I was like, I need to have some level of organization. Otherwise, things are going to go haywire. And, but it's like, I didn't drink till after college and didn't smoke or do anything. Like, there's none of those things. It was just very simple. I woke up, made my bed, went to school, did my cross country or track, came home, did homework, ate dinner, went to bed. And just over and over again. There's a little bit of the level of that like, it just works. And a lot of that was motivated by certain levels of like expectations and delusions about reality that it's like kept me out of a lot of issues. Now, if you take that same thing of like aspiring to be better than you are, that then pairs with, oh, I could be a little bit stronger, I could be a little bit faster, and so I would, I continue to push. But if you don't have an underlying, call it athleticism, which is really a blueprint of skills that allows your body to work in the way that it should. So in the same way a car that runs well has a base level of, the transmission is connected, the oil's clean, the gas is full, whatever. If those base level of like the heuristics, the patterns of your body aren't there because of whatever reason you just didn't really develop them, then you're going to feel awkward and you're going to get hurt because you're grinding the gears, so to speak, of your body, of your car, of your body. So I kept getting hurt. And so then, that kept in this kind of same piece where it's like, I wanted to run, I wanted to jump, but I was always stuck. And so then all of that, so that whole little spiel was basically, I had high aspirations, and the whole point of the foot thing was like, I identified that as, oh, that's the issue. I saw a video of myself walking across the turf field at the gym I worked at. I looked super awkward. I was like, that's not cool. Something went wrong there. Like, I'm duck-footed. Something's weird. My arch is collapsed. And I looked down at my feet, and I'm like, oh, they don't look the same. One's turned out. The arch is collapsed. It's kind of weird. And then I was like, I should probably fix that. And then I just started taking my shoes off to do some more lifting, doing some stuff with socks. I'm like, oh, this feels good. So let me get some shoes that are a little bit more like minimalist. And so then I kind of eased into that. But it was never like, I don't really care about the shoes or the feet. It's like, I want to run. I want to jump. I want to be athletic. I want to be cool. I want to be like you. I want to be like you. I want to be like the cool, calm, like I'm out there, like that's what I always aspired to be. And so it wasn't like, oh, this makes sense. It was like, oh, this is going to help. Because otherwise, I had a bad sprained ankle when I was in college. I had patellar tendonitis. I had, shin splints, turf toe, metatarsalgia. I had all kinds of back issues, chronic shoulder dislocations. It was like, something's not happening to my body, and I'm not able to live the life I want, and I'm going to figure that out. And the feet are a means to an end in some capacity. And now I have a lot more appreciation for them, but like, it wasn't like this, here's an idea. It's like, no, I want to run faster, and it ain't happening right now. So,
Yeah. It's kind of interesting. I kind of went through the same kind of path. Like you feel like you're going downwards. I get, both my shoulders are kind of messed up, my low back, my knee, now my right knee, and then you're going through these constant issues, but long term you end up figuring out how to fix them, and then make sure that you can mitigate it for other people. And so maybe you've kind of experienced that as, yeah, it sucked for yourself to go through that, but long term, in the benefit of others, it kind of ended up panning out in more of a good way. Would you say that kind of fits your description a little bit?
this would be the archetype of like, this if one man tells the truth to save the world kind of thing. Like, there's a level of, if you want to really improve things externally, you have to be the better expression. You have to focus on yourself, and if you find the issue in yourself, I do think that there's a level of, I mean, from a coaching perspective, for example, my job is to be able to solve, or like, not even solve, because I can't solve other people's problems, but to point out compensations in other people's life. And that could be their movement, it could be their thinking, it could be their lifestyle habits. So you point out compensations, which are basically like, you would be doing this, but you're doing this now, and so that's causing this friction in your life, and that's an issue. So, you know, there's a period. What might look on the outside in a sense of, oh, I'm doing all this stuff to try and share with other people, is really an attempt to try and understand it myself. And you understand things better by teaching, because it means you've codified some piece of information into a digestible, like, unit. And so that, I think there's a lot of that, which is like, it's I don't know how much forward facing we can be. You can have someone ask you. So I really think there's two things you can ever do for people. There's education, and then there's reminding them. And more people need to be reminded than need to be educated. And a lot of people, the reminding part is tough, because I don't think either of those happen without consent. So in a sense, the reminding, let's just say you want to remind people of, if you're coaching someone, you've entered in a relationship where they've sought you out to ask you to either educate or remind them. And so in that relationship, you have people you work with, they pay you money, which means that they're putting stored energy into you, and then they care about it. And so they're either going to ask you either will see something in compensation and go, hey, you're doing this, what's going on there? And they're like, oh, I don't know. Then it's an education thing. Or they go, I know, you're right, I got to work on this. And so that is a more direct one-to-one. If it's not in that direct coaching relationship, then you educate or remind people by being the better expression, meaning you exude that through your life. So if you care about, for example, if for looking pulled together and being professional is important to you, then you'll show up in a tie and a suit and look good, and you'll care about your presentation. That reminds people, in a sense, okay, you know what? It really does help when you show up. Like, for example, the lighting. Like, you showed up and your lighting looks good, you look professional, pulled together. It's a reminder to me of that really matters. So if you want to show up and be a professional, you take those things. So it's not like I already knew some of those pieces, and what I forgot, I then asked you. So when you were the best, none of the conversation you thought today would probably be about the lighting at all. And yet that was the thing that immediately stuck out to me. And you can't predict that with people. Like, if you just have to go and do the thing that's important to you. You ask the question, you learn it, and you show up in a way, and you are the expression in so much that you care about something. You are that expression. And then people who are interested and are also predisposed to that will ask you. You educate them. Or they'll just say, fuck, you know what? I do know that, and I should have done that. And I can't believe I got lazy on that. And that's really what it is with people. And I do think, I mean, if I may coach for a moment, unsolicited, so in this relationship, you've mentioned the idea of giving back, and I know that there's a level of, like, it feels good to say that, but it also seems like a lot of people I know will hide behind that, as opposed to just feeling like, yeah, I just really like to do this, and this is important to me. And there's a level of, like, it's not bad, it's just there's like a degree of, like, so for example, my best-selling foot program that I spent 4 years working on, rewrote the book. I mean, I'm like hundreds and hundreds of hours on this thing, sold it 3,000 times. I'm giving it away for free now. Okay, like you could say that's a very magnanimous thing and it's, good, you're giving away. And I could say I wouldn't do that, but really it's like, I just, I almost feel like any decision you make solves more problems than it creates. If you make a decision that creates more problems than it solves, you've made a mistake because you missed some fact. And it's like the best decisions you make create or solve more problems than they create. And it's not bad to say that I could tell you, okay, I gave the foot program away for free. It makes it, it puts me in another, like, just as a business example for people who care about this. I foresee that the biggest thing that's going to be beneficial in the next 5 to 10 years is your ability to be trusted as a human. So that's your brain and your thinking, not the information. People can have an AI write a book and do some foot programs, and now I'm competing with everybody else on a foot program. I don't want to be in that game anymore. I'm going to go ahead and beat them by giving goodwill. Good. That's also step one of my academy, which is a 12-month program that then you've already done a month. It's a great program and it gets you benefits. So great. Now I've got a positive lead on something. It's a great lead magnet, the best lead magnet, because it's an actual program I sell. And it saves me from time from everybody that DMs me that can't afford it. It just, here, positive. It's like I could list out 6 or 7 reasons to do that. And so, but again, I didn't do that until I was ready for it. So it took years to build up to the business where I could afford, so to speak, to do that. And then when that decision solved more problems than it made, it was good. Does it make benefit for other people? Of course. Is that my primary reason? Yeah, it's there, sure, but like it's not the reason. So it's just an interesting thing of like, if you get clear on your incentives and your path, then you can just be like, yeah, this is exactly what I'm doing. This is why, and it still benefits you. It doesn't take away from that, So
Yeah.
Just interesting ideas.
Yeah. So then, walking back to the initial thought, then.
I'm sorry. This is why I have to write a blog, because like my brain just constantly goes on like these things, and if I don't write, then it just.
Yeah, I like it. It's forcing me to kind of stay the course. But so then so then you solved your own problems, and by solving your own problems, it made it easier to benefit other people. Not necessarily that you're going out of your way to do that, but you had to be the example.
I don't think that. So, for example, this is, you see a lot on social media where like there's business coaches and life coaches. It's like, well, yeah, they kind of like picked up a piece of information and they're just like passing it through. But it's like, did you solve your problem? Like, if you didn't really solve your problem. So there's 2 parts to that question, which is I solved my problem, but I'm still in the middle of the journey. And I think that's the hard part, is that, okay, you could say if my problem was plantar fasciitis, yeah, I solved it. And, but there's more to the story, there's like a bigger story, because I'm still alive. I'm still in the middle of some next problem. And I think that's hard. That's the hard part about this coaching relationship, is like, we're all climbing and hiking up a mountain. Okay. So I will circle back. I promise this will lead back into it. If you imagine everybody's climbing up a mountain and I might be 2 or 3 steps ahead of you, I get to a spot where like, oh, that's a little tricky spot. And somebody helps me, lends a hand back and helps me get over this like high ledge, or I have some unique ability where I was able to jump a little higher and get over it. For whatever reason, I'm like, that was tough. I pause and I look back and I will help people up for a few times, and eventually help people up and say, oh, actually I could build a ladder. So I use the information, let's say then I say, hey, I'll charge you $2 for a hand up and you get, because we're all on this ladder. I use that money, build a ladder. I free myself back up to keep climbing, because I'm still on the mountain too, and we're going. And that's what it is, because if I stop there, a lot of people stop and make themselves professional handholders. And they say, they reach back, this is all I do. It's like they stop climbing the mountain. So for me, the mountain is this idea of athleticism, which is I want to be able to run and jump and feel like develop into this, what I felt like was my truest sense as a human. So it was like, okay, I'm noticing I had this problem. This is how I solved it. This is where I messed up. This is the common patterns you have in this, and I see those things in you. I can help you do those. After years of doing that, I put that into a program. That program then became the ladder that I was able to first sell to afford the next piece of my journey, and then give away so I could leave it there and move on, because I want to move forward in this bigger journey. That's where it goes to. So does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it's actually, I've never heard of coaching in that sense. I feel like most of the coaches I'm around are very staunch. Well, I have this degree and I have this. And so you almost find, and I've talked about this in other podcasts, but they learn within this box. And so their knowledge never drifts out of that box.
Yeah.
And then so, you'll bring up a new idea. And I ran into this with like asking, hey, can we try this or that? And I get a lot of pushback because it's not in that box. It's not within that knowledge. And, it does sound like they kind of stagnate and they don't learn that much because, well, I'm the authority. And kind of based off of what you've said, it sounds like, hey, I am a piece of the authority, but I'm also still learning myself. And so maybe it's more of an honest way of coaching that I feel like more people kind of need to hear that. That's kind of a beautiful way to put it.
Well, you got it recorded. So to use that analogy, the person who gets, and so there's two things. There's professional reputation. There's not wanting to be wrong. So there's personal ego, professional reputation, and money. If I spent $100,000 getting a degree, guess what? I'm going to then, I'm indebted to pay that off. And so I also want to feel like that's important. So I created an ivory tower of thought around what's okay and what's not. And you might have seen some of this in terms of like how you coach people, diving, like what works, what doesn't. And, maybe this isn't the best tool. It's like, these are why things die hard, is because ideas, if people are idea like antennas, the idea comes in and we can magnify them, and the good ideas should, benefit and flourish, and bad ideas should die off. And the idea is that ideas die instead of us. But when people latch onto an idea, they have to die for the idea to die as well, because they're just not beneficial, like the rice thing or any number of examples you could look at. So somebody will go and say, oh, I got this ledge and this is my job. I've learned, because instead of the person who sits there and their whole life becomes a hand-holder thing, they then create a school to teach other people how to do a hand-holder thing and help someone up in that tricky spot. And then there's a certification, and then you put an acronym around it, and then you make it, oh, we all do this thing. And so you have 15 people that are all trying to fight for a spot. And not only now are those people not continuing on their journey, they're also looking for other spots of the mountain that look just like that they can have their own little niche. And they're going to create a slight degree deviation of how to reach out and help someone up on this one spot. And then they're actually going to literally reject somebody else who said, well, there's another way around here. We don't even have to do this. Or there's a ladder right here. They're going to, that's not proven by studies. Show me the study. Where's the study? Well, guess what? You're running the studies and I can't get it through because this is free or whatever it is. So it's a good analogy, but I do think people get stuck because this is the way it's always been done, is a trap. And so you get there's a sticking point in some capacity. I think you nailed that, which is there's resistance. In order to overcome the resistance to change, your pain must be so bad that you tried all the conventional methods, and which is every single hero story. If you look at my knees hurt, Ben Patrick, for example, like my knees hurt, I did this, this, and this, and then it didn't work, so I tried this, and it worked. Oh, okay. Pain was so bad, there's a whole psychology around pain that I think is fascinating. It's like, what is pain? But different conversation. The point is, the pain is so bad, or you have a vendetta. Like there's like there's pride, there's ego or something like that. Maybe that's another form of pain. But in general, I think I'll say there's two ways. The pain is so bad, or you're just a curious eccentric that you're like, you're deluded enough to not even consider that would be a different way. You just, like the first person who put the lighting behind their head was just like, they didn't even realize it was there. And they go, wow, that looks really good because I can see the outline of your head. And they're like, well, I just like light. It's like whatever. They kind of have this weird thing and they try and play a bunch of different things because they're an eccentric and they don't even. So, anyways, that's enough of the analogy. But yes, I think it's important as part of the journey, no matter if you are coaching or if you're on that, is you have to see yourself as part of a bigger journey. So, do you have another question in direction? Because we could talk about pain and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I just find it very interesting that you've even been able to kind of run into this mindset. Was that like your mentors that have kind of given you this, or was this just through your own experience?
When you say mindset, what exactly what were you referring to?
Even like kind of the analogy that you were bringing up, right? Like you have to be consistently learning. It kind of reminds me of like Ido Portal. Like he's always doing the movements. He's always experiencing and moving. You can kind of tell he's always learning, because I feel like what he's been teaching based off of just what he's been posting is always ever changing. Do you think your first mentor kind of led you down that path of like, hey, you have to be able to show this to be able to teach it, or how did you run into this mindset?
So there's a few pieces. One of which in the last few years I've had the opportunity afforded to spend a lot more time reading and writing. and I do a lot of podcasts and listen to that. So like, but thinking and writing. And so part of that is trying to understand why things are the way they are. Another part of that is I would consider myself a professional that took the amateur route in a sense. So if you look at coaching and training, it's a very low barrier to entry. Meaning all you need to do is get a weekend certification, or even just order a book, and voila. There's a piece of that which is nobody assumed I knew anything because I had alphabet soup behind my name. I didn't have. I mean, I had a bachelor's degree, but it wasn't like, oh, he's got a doctorate, he's a master, he's a physical therapist, whatever. And so eventually, you have to be able to you learn to evaluate ideas on the does it grow corn heuristic as opposed to so and so. It's I as you spend more time with people, you stop trusting the appeal to authority. Meaning, so and so said it and they're a doctor. Well, yes, but so and so also has debt and they're miserable and they're divorced. It's like but divorce meaning like they're just unhappy and I'm divorced too, so I should be clarifying that. But engaged again, so I'm working on that. I'm much happier this time. So the point is, there's an observation that happens, which is I see people and I see the contradiction of like the doctors and the surgeons. I would, you meet them like they're your friends' dads, and they're coming home and eating pastries and like the stuff from I'm like, what are you doing with your life? Like they're overweight. It's like physician heal thyself thing. So part of it is seeing the hypocrisy of people. Part of it is not having any type of professional certification to rely on, so you have to evaluate ideas by yourself, and part of it's just being really stubborn, an ego. Like there's a level of like I want to figure things out for myself, and so most of the people you see that are coaches would have been most of the people that are struggling. I mean, I can't tell you the amount of people, and I'm like this myself, so I understand a little bit of it. I get dozens, if not a dozen, if not hundreds, over the span of like DMs. And people saying, I'm suffering this pain for so long. And I'm like, I do this program. Oh, it's $100. I'm like, what do you want? $100 or to be inventing? Like, but there's a stubbornness, which is they want things for free. And there's a whole level of, I want to figure things out. But there's a psychology behind that. But then there's also like, I don't know if it's specific to men, but as a man, this is how I felt. Like there's a stubbornness of like, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to do this. And I was like, that it's like seeing your own pain is your own adventure. And I think that there's a beauty in that. So, not very, most people do the coaching because they're a kid and they go into sports, but then maybe it's if you don't have as much coaching as a kid, you don't see the value of coaching. And so you kind of like, you think therapy and all that stuff is silly. And so you're like, I'm going to coach. But it's like if you do sports as a kid, you always have a coach. And so if you're coachable, you grow a lot. Maybe it's a stubbornness. So, and I would say the personal aspect is, I think it's like a Hegelian dialectic. I don't know if that's the actual thing, but it sounds fancy. But the idea of like being able to evaluate ideas empirically on their own merit, like I shouldn't have to convince you of something based on logic. Like it should be obvious in a sense. Like, what is gravity? Well, gravity holds us to the ground. It's like, why? Because we're on the ground, like, and some of those things, and I'm not saying that's a great example. That was just off the top, but like in some capacity, if I can't explain things to you in a way that doesn't require a massive leap of faith, if you can explain things to a spiritual, conceptual lens, or you can explain things to a material lens, and you should be able to explain the same thing both sides. And when you can do that, you have a mastery over the concept, and you can walk back and forth, which I very much enjoy the experience of what it's like to go through pain or to have these things. So I end up thinking on both sides constantly. I think it gets you to frame differently. And then, of course, you start to meet other people, and ultimately, your ability to think for yourself, when you pair that with working with a coach or mentor, you start to see their own lens. And so you can kind of take the influence of a bunch of different artists and then see what you find valuable and then put that into your own voice. And that's really all we're doing. We're just kind of like making a collage of some things that we see interesting and things that are working, and we go from there. So and then the other piece that I would say is just a level of like self-interested motivation. Like I like to do stuff, and so I found that you either have time or you have money. And at first, when you don't have money, you spend your time, you coach people, and you walk through and you do the thing. But eventually, when you start to get money for that thing, you develop a little bit of rotation. You realize I want my time back. And so if you're smart, you realize that you buy your time back by using money to at first get people, you build a solution, and then you kind of work your way into like, okay, this is a ladder, so to speak, in our analogy of going up the mountain, or it could be a program, which is now like I've put information and built it and iterated it and put it in. Ideally, you do that before you're burnt out. So you take each few years before you burn out, you start to like pour your energy and time into writing things down, making a program, refining it, selling the programs, making it better, selling it to clients, making it better, getting the feedback, and you get something that's really good, and it stands on its own. You let that go, you let it float, and then now I get to the ladder because now that frees me to go on the next piece. I do think one other aspect of this I think might be interesting. There's a percentage of your life that's work and a percentage of your life that's play. So work is the idea of like a discipline. There's a very focused, like most of what you do at this point is very work. Like you don't get to there's parts of your time where you're just maybe part of your training as a diver where you're like, I'm gonna go and play. Like no rules, no whatever. You might start from a different height, you might jump from a different place. You change something that throws off the variables of what you have. You add in play adds in more variables. So I'm gonna change different things. I'm gonna open things up and see what happens. I'm gonna try to jump on a trampoline or whatever it is. I don't know. But you play, and that's where you explore. But in order to play, you have to afford yourself the time by work. Work is where you focus on a specific. You limit variables, meaning a cut down of, we can't have conversation. We can't focus on this. We have to have a very specific thing. We're working on this, and we create the box, the container that we can play within. So, for example, right now we have the Riverside, the app. We've set up we did a bunch of work on the outside to set up a place where we can play with conversation. Now, in your own life, if you think about that, whatever it is that you find meaningful, whether it's your passion, your pursuit, your obsession, whatever it is, so I could say training, for example. Really, training for me is a mode of ideation, so I can learn so they can write. But from the training perspective, there's a part of it which is I want to solve this problem, and so I have this big thing. So there's a part where it's like I have to play and explore that, but I have to afford myself the time to do that, meaning I have to have enough money to be able to have a gym membership or to be able to have enough time to go do this thing. So there's enough of life that it requires I have to eat, I have to sleep, I have to be in relationships. There's work. Work affords me the ability to play. As I get better at the playing, I can discover something. And so then once I discover that, I'm like, I bump into the next problem. I work at that. And you start to ratchet yourself up step by step on the rungs of a ladder where I can discover something and then I work at it to get better. And then once it gets better, I pass that on. So if you're coaching and diving, for example, if you're saying, let's say you make some money coaching people and you also dive, you go and you play and explore. Ido Portal goes out and plays and explores. His play is built in. And so the more you can afford that, you might be able to say, I spend 80% of my time playing, 90% of my time playing, but then there's 10% work. But as I get better and better at that, as you get more and more elite at the thing you do, you can charge more and you buy yourself more time to play. And so more of your time is spent, more of my time is spent working out and writing and waffling around now than it ever was before, but that's because there's a level that you earn. But you have to ratchet yourself up step by step on the ladder. So the work part is what you've already done. It's the program I put together on the feed. It's the years or the months or weeks or years that you spend like suffering in this like uncertainty phase where you're learning, you're just refining, you're trying to figure things out, and you're trying to refine an actual solution. Then you put that solution to other people. You coach them, walk it through them in person, then you write it down, you make videos, you start to put it into a product, and then you make it stand on its own. That's the work part. But when you do that well, you afford yourself, you should be playing 10, 15, 20% of the very, if you can't play at all, you're a slave. Basically, that's what a slavery is, the inability to play. So if you are so indebted, you've $200,000 of college debt and you can't possibly find the time to play, you're a slave. So if you can say 5%, 10% to say, I'm gonna do a podcast once a week. You're playing a little bit. That's good. You've made a space where you can play in the realm you want to do. Or I'm going to set up the first 10% of my diving practice. I'm just going to explore. Or maybe one day of a week I'm going to explore. That's play. And if you can't do that, you're in a world of hurt because you're never going to ideate, never going to get better. You're never going to explore. And then every single time you get that play, you afford us, you come up with new ideas, you see something from a different angle, then you can explore that and then you can teach other people because you'll be the better expression of that thing. They come and ask you. Then it's the consent thing. Hey, Brando, can you teach me? I saw you doing this thing. It's crazy. Can you show me how you did that thing? Well, they're interested. They're attractive. Or you're reminding them of something. So some people are David Goggins. I don't think he teaches anything new, but he's a professional reminder. He's got millions of people that need to stay hard. Okay, sure. Jocko Willink, good. There's a handful of these guys that have this, Nick Bear, go one more. Like, they have their patented thing, and they're not breaking new ground. They're just sitting there, and they're reminding you of the instructions. And other people, the creatives, the eccentrics, the savants, etc., like, they're out there in the wings of weird stuff. David Weck is brilliant. And the stuff he's bringing in is going to take other people like breaking it down, and everyone has their piece of the pie, so to speak. But it's all part of this, like, you, if you don't have some space of your life to go and like explore something, and if you don't see some part of your life as I'm still climbing that mountain, you get stuck. And then when you get stuck, you get burnt out. When you get burnt out, you get unhappy. When you get unhappy, you want to bring other people down. And that's when you start to, criticize, take people down, show them the study, blah, blah, blah. And it's not fun. So,
Yeah. Okay. Well, then in the realm of being able to teach someone, not remind them, bring me to feet. If we were going to start to fix someone's foot, what would be the first steps? Would it be to take off just regular shoes, big brand shoes? What would be the best way to start fixing issues, imbalances, you name it?
So broadly, what you want to realize with the feet is that they're part of your body. So when you remind people, so you have to put into perspective what's going on. So if someone just wants to fix pain, they will buy a stiffer shoe, an orthotic, they'll buy a more cushioned shoe, whatever. So you have to find someone that's motivated. And the first, I think before you can educate people, you have to remind them in some sense, and maybe that's a false aspect, but like you have to remind people of their humanity. And a lot of that is if they don't, people that don't already have some level of pain or like a nagging intuitive impulse inside of them that's pushing them in that direction to know, like the thing that will actually to notice the Vivo Barefoot, there's something there. And if you explored that, you might notice what state of mind was they in? Why was I interested? Well, I'm sure there was somebody who showed you a commercial about that before, but why this one? What's the combination of these factors? That's something you could explore. That's interesting. Those are a lot of what I would focus on in the coaching is like, where are you at in this thing? Because what you realize is like information is just a dime a dozen, and that's part of it. But you have to contextualize everything for people. And so they're either going to bring you the context of my feet ache, my knees ache, in which case they're asking you because you seem to do something like sprint barefoot that seems crazy that they couldn't do, and you go, what's going on? If I tried to do that, my knees would explode. Okay, that's interesting. And so then I can ask questions, but basically you've something about you has reminded them that their circumstance in life is not either natural or healthy or ideal or what they want. They could have better and could be different, and they don't think it should be this way, right? Everyone gets to that point at some point, and sometimes it's after multiple heart attacks and having a stent in your heart and you're miserable and you want something different. Sometimes it's just because you saw a commercial and you're like, this seems like that's great. Like you could make the argument of your fact that your knees are so bad that you put nitroglycerin packs on them is like that's the equivalent of someone else's heart attack. So like, what are you? I'm saying this is why like after you spend time working with thousands of people in pain, you realize there's such a deep. It's not just as I can tell you, stretch your hip flexors out, work on the anterior part of your ankle. It's like, okay. But what I'm really interested in is what part of you is driving you to do that? Like, where is this thing of like, if I can't keep going, like I'm willing to literally rip my knees off for what? The point is, if someone is so you figure if they're in pain, you have to contextualize and you educate them about why things are connected. And most often, if they're in pain and they're not willing to just take the quick symptom fix, there's some underlying thing of, okay, I tried the other stuff and it didn't work. Okay, now you educate them, but you have to contextualize and put it in there. The reminding part is also just saying, hey, the feet are part of your body. So you can't, you first you bring sensation back to the feet, and if I'm in person with someone, I'll do that with my hands, meaning I'll grab their toes and curl them underneath. And almost always there's a palpable pop, pop, pop as their toes been for the first time in years. Or I will pull them back. And so you start to show them. And oftentimes the most effective thing is to show them what my feet can do. And by very simple of like, if you look at it's your hands are a great example. You should be able to spread your fingers, make a fist, do a thumbs up. That's really, if you can do those three, that's you got a lot with because there's other things you can do with your hands, and you could learn to do those with your feet, but it's not time effective or beneficial in our modern society. So, the point is, I show them, hey, do you see my feet? How when I make a foot fist, my knuckles are bouncy, and you can see it here. It's like there's a level of like it's you have there's laxity in your fingers. The tendons are there's a bounciness, a suppleness to the tendons and end digits of your hand. So that's a big piece. Okay. Do you see how I can put my thumb up? I can bring my toes together. I can spread them out. All right, can you do that? No. Okay. Now, next step is you look at your forearm and you say, okay, you see how I'm moving all my fingers and I'm moving that, and you have them do this too. And you see all the muscles in the forearm that are start to engage and wiggle. The 26 or 27 muscles in your forearm, guess what? If I can't move my hand, I can't engage that. I may get a handful of stuff if I'm making a fist, but none of this is happening. So
Mm.
do you think that if all of that muscle in the forearm stopped moving, do you think it would get stiff? Yeah. Do you think that would mess with your elbow? Yeah. Do you think that would mess with your shoulder? Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Same thing at your feet. You get them to wiggle. I show them wiggle the toes, and you feel the foreleg, forearm, foreleg, the front of the leg and the calves. You get them to move, and it's like, oh, okay. And then the thing is the tear jerker is I take my thumbs and press in, and they can do this too, right behind the tibia, on the inside of the shin, right behind the tibia. You'll feel like it's in between the calf and the bone. Ooh, that stuff right there, people do not move that. And so it gets really stiff. And that will literally, it's make grown men cry. And you get so stiff in there and say, okay, that's because you can't move your toes. And because you can't move your toes, you can't balance. You have a higher likelihood of falling. Your feet are stiff. You have a higher likelihood of plantar fasciitis and or turf toe and or metatarsalgia. And I can go down the list. And your knees are going to start hurting because all the tissue goes into your lower leg and that controls the balance in knee. So what you contextualize and say your feet matter. Then we look and say, what are your feet living in? Okay, you got socks that are super, super stiff. You got shoes that don't let your foot bend. They're raised heel. They're narrow toe box, or they've like 2 inches of mushroom padding underneath. That's tough, and that's hard for them to move. And so then you contextualize, and you have to give people a reason because you have to understand they've either never considered the fact that shoes, the ethylene vinyl acetate that is under the foam that's under our shoes wasn't around 50 years ago, or that started getting used 50 years ago, and or that there are people that existed their entire, and still do, that exist their entire life without shoes and they're just fine. The people are default barefoot. So they've either never considered that, or they've been told that if they walk on the ground, they're going to get a fungal infection. They're going to get a bacteria, a tapeworm, or some type of worm in their foot. They're going to get step on glass. They're going to needle. They're going to get there's a huge fear. You got to think like the war on terror was a fail. The war on drugs was a fail. And now it's the war on germs. That is the new thing. It's this unwinnable war. It's the war on germs. Wash your hands. Help win the war on germs. Well, guess what? You got trillions of them all over your body. Like you can't not like. If you don't have germs, what are germs? It's like dirt and soil. Dirt is just soil where you don't want it to be. Germs are just bacteria where you don't want it to be. It's like we have this idea that like, oh, the thing is clean. Like, no, it's everywhere. And so we have this war on germs that then has made people hypochondriacs and worried about the fact that if I walk outside, I don't even know what, but I'm gonna be covered in germs. And it's like, yeah. So you have to sympathize with the fact that that's why people think that I have to have shoes. I can't run without shoes. I can't walk without shoes. And then you realize, you point with this stuff. So there's conversations that are layered in this, but none of that matters until they feel it themselves. When you can feel your feet move, you can feel the things in your forearm, your bones in your feet move. You can balance on one foot and realize I can't move my foot. When I can get them to stand on one foot, close their eyes, and realize that they can't even do that for 5 seconds, and then they feel the burning in their foot, they feel that, and then they start to connect that to the fact that like, oh, my feet don't look like yours, and my calves aren't like yours, and my feet weren't like that, and and I can show them pictures and walk them through like this is what I used to look like and walk like, and you contextualize it, and you give them. You both educate them, but you also then remind them that they're not meant for this, and then you put it in context of this is the mountain you're climbing. And for most people, they think of plantar fasciitis or I don't know, like what's the shin splints or let's say posterior tibialis tendonitis. They just think of that as like a road bump on the way to like running. Like, I'm doing a marathon and I just got to get over this thing. It's like, no, that is the thing you need to be working on. That's your body saying this is the most important part because something about your shoes, because it's not just the shoes. It's not just the feet. It's how they interact with it. If you've worn shoes your entire life, you've probably never thought much about your running form outside of my cadence. And if you've been taught to run on a treadmill, that's not the same as running real ground because the ground's moving for you. You're not having to propel yourself forward. And you can be an elite condition or have elite conditioning as a world-class endurance athlete and have never thought about your running. Your toenails are falling off. Your feet are destroyed. You have abundance. And it's like, well, guess what I can do? It's like, well, guess what you won't be able to do in a few years? Or guess what you can only do with shoes? It's like, there are layers to this stuff that if you've never thought about your feet, you've never thought about your balance, you've never thought about your integration, you've never thought about engaging your feet, you never thought about your fascia, you've never thought about your plyometric suit or your fascial suit that gives you plyometric access, you haven't thought about sports. There's so many things you have not thought about and all you think is the foot thing. So there's a big uphill battle relative. If I try to just say you're wrong and do this stuff, I want to understand where they're coming from, what's going on. But the biggest thing is contextualizing why the feet matter.
Wow. I mean, there's a lot there. That was a beautiful way of doing it. I think then my mind goes to, so you walk people through, the education, the reminding, and then now they're starting to understand all these steps based off of your clients that you have worked with. Because I've been going through kind of a somewhat similar path myself. How long does that usually take, that path, if they're really, they've switched over to barefoot shoes and they've been doing a solid amount of training? Because, I mean, you look at someone in my position, I've been wearing non-barefoot shoes for, 23 years, 22 years of my life. And then, I've switched over the past couple years and I'm still dealing with issues. Yeah. So what does that usually look like?
So again, you have to understand the hidden bias of your question is, how long does the path take? Well, that assumes that there's an end to the path. And if the end of the path is I fixed my foot, great. What, are you going to sit in the couch and just it's like, and part of this is this idea, most of our schooling as young kids is done through stories. And so we watch Disney movies, we watch superhero movies. And what happens? The Matrix, whatever, you name it. Regular person, shitty life, something happens to them. They get thrown in an adventure. They learn all this stuff. They overcome things. They battle. They do this, and they come back. End of the movie. Great. Winning. Yeah. But guess what? That girlfriend that they just won and the whole thing and it's great, they're going to have an argument in about 3 weeks because they just realized that they're, one of them leaves the toilet seat out. But it's like, they don't show that part. And that's not, maybe they have the sequel, but even the sequel is like, well, and so we've been taught to think about life like this. And you have to be careful. So just to use Chris Williamson as an example, because I was talking about this with my buddy, you listen to him tell a story. I was a lonely kid. I was the only child. I was miserable. I got bullied. His story about how desperate he was as a kid and knowing this stuff. And so then I threw myself into trying to get, public opinion and people to like me. So I did club promoting and did thousands of people and did all these things. And then I was miserable and no one understood it. And I was super successful and all these things that people would want. I had all the money and the fame and the girls. And then I was miserable. So I gave it up and I'm doing podcasts. And I'm so happy. In 6 years and look how great it's doing. And guess what? You're 35 and you'll be 45. And then you'll be 50. Hopefully, I think he'll live on. You're in the middle of another one of those dips or right peaks. You're in a constant peak and valley of a story. You just don't know which one it is. Because guess what? In 3 years, I fully expect, or 3 to 5 or 10 years, it's fully expected. I was loving it and it was great and it was fantastic, but I was ignoring these things and I was working so much because I had this underlying neuroses about who I had to do, and I was getting burnt out and my health was suffering, whatever. And then I realized I just need to back off. I still love to do podcasts, but I had to take care of this and this, and I had to how do we know that that's not where he is right now? So the people you're using as a role model, as a heuristic for how you should aim your life in, they're in the middle of a thing too. And that is, of all the things I've tried to really be careful about, is that's why I the analogy of I'm still on a mountain here is anybody that would look and say, oh, I've got this, is I'm still trying things. I'm still that's why on the front end of the conversation, I'm like, oh, this is my situation. I got a tiny, I like to be honest, I'm not making millions of dollars. I'm there right now. I'm making literally, I've made $0 this month because I'm trying a new gamble on an idea with the launching the academy. Who knows? Maybe it'll work and you're like, oh my God, it's amazing. But maybe it won't. I'll keep trying. But being in the middle of it, that's why I share when I get injured. I share when I told you I have my neck injury that took me out for a month. I wrote all about that. It's because I'm in the middle of one of those peaks too. I just don't know if it's an up or down, in the moment. And everyone else is. And so the underlying hidden implication of this is that people go into pain oh, this is just a thing I have to get through. It's no, this is your life. This is it. You're on the path and this is something. And if you just think of this as this is the boring part of the movie. I just want to skip over this part. I'm going to hit the 15-second forward on my podcast because, they're talking about the same story I heard. That's how we treat this thing, and we end up in a situation where we repeat the same cycle because we never learn. Because we think of things as, oh, I'm going to fix it. It's going to end. It's Okay, you fix your knee pain. The reason you're still in pain is because you are still, like, you as an individual are still trying to do more with your body. So guess what? You fix your foot pain. Well, you're still having issues because you try push something, you run into issues. The smart person says, let me sit here and try and work on this stuff. And then you get it. The goal of getting healthy is to then go back and be healthy again. People do this all the time with food and diet. They go, oh, I used to be able to do this, but then my gut got messed up and I couldn't have lactose and I couldn't have gluten. It's like, and now I'm healthy, I'm good. If you were truly healthy, you'd be able to eat what you want. And I do a caveat is that there are some things that are real and fake or whatever, but like, if you could say I have gluten intolerance, well, I can have gluten if it's this or that. It's like, you figure out what it is. But if you actually got healthy, a healthy body has access to do the things without inhibition. Like, that's the thing. For example, to take it into a non-political realm with running. So I used to be able to sprint all the time. Then I got plantar fasciitis. But I fixed my plantar fasciitis. I just don't sprint anymore. It's like, well, no, you didn't. You've even if you have fixed it, the true healthy expression of that is that you can go back and do the thing. So the person who does that says, okay, I got this. You overcome injury, which is you understand that pain exists. It's part of life. It's the most defining, realistic characteristic of all human experience. I can go and encounter, I can learn where I made a mistake or where I didn't know something and I can overcome that. I can be reminded of the things that I know I just was dropping the ball on. And I go, do I expect to never get hurt again? No, because if I'm living life right, I'm pushing myself into the growth zone and trying to do something different. So you saying, okay, I could do this and I was having these pains. So I did some training, got stronger, now I'm here. I may still have pains, but guess what? You bumped up your capacity. And so that doesn't necessarily mean that you still don't have blind spots. So that's the percent of the work, which is I still go back. I still have to go do the boring thing. I still have to do the warm up. I still have to do the same drills. I still stick with the basics because that's the work. And that's me not being too, the problem is someone who gets so good at it thinks they get this ego. Like, I'm just going to 100% play because I don't need to have any of the basics. That's the person who gets totally screwed because their life destroyed because they forget the basics. You got to remember the same breathing drills, the same whatever it is. And like you see kids that want to skip the basics. You got to go back to the basics. But if you have that as part of your life and you're making sure that you're not necessarily overlooking the things that are simple, then you play and you do that stuff. So the part is the play will also put you at risk. This is why people don't do it. They will put you at risk of getting hurt again. I go to jiu-jitsu. Yes, I've gotten hurt and multiple times doing it, but does that mean I stop? No. I realize every time I've gotten hurt, whether it's this sublux shoulder or neck injury or a finger or whatever it is, and this is a newer thing. I keep running, for example, too, is sprinting. It's like, last year ago I had strained calves on both sides because I missed a whole bunch of stiffness at my big toe. I wasn't paying attention to it because I skipped the basics. I go back to that, find a blind spot, short my training, rebuild back up because guess what? No one really cares what I'm doing anyways, and I can still work on that stuff. Then I go and I explore a little bit more. But I'm still, there's still like maybe you should pull a hamstring or strain something a little bit. There's still tweaks to something because I'm pushing my body at the higher level. If you're doing life right, it's not that you ever expect to not have the stuff. But that's part of ultimately what I realized. Here's a foot program. It'll help your feet. You'll feel dramatically better. But if you're living life right, we got 11 more months of this stuff because over that year-long arc, I'm going to teach you that pain is your teacher and is your best friend, not something to be eternal. I want to help you use your pain because the goal up front is here's pain-free. I'm going to help you be pain-free. The reality is you'll never be pain-free because pain is the thing that orients you to life, and that's how you learn to live your life. So that whole arc is just the underlying essence of, with that perspective, I guarantee that perspective right there can solve more pain than any number of corrective exercises alone. Because you start to see it as part of the context of the story of your life. And it's the defining characteristic of your intuition that says, oh, we should do this. We should pay attention to that. So, all that being said is, how long does it take? Well, I've had people that literally are so disconnected from their life that the first day they move their feet, they have immediate relief. I'm talking people that I have DMs, I have messages and written text from people that said, I had plantar fasciitis for 3 years. I went to orthotics, I did cortisone shots, I had surgery, I had all these things and shoes, and one day your program, I fixed it. That is not an exaggeration. That is a sad reality that they have literally overlooked the basics of the basics of the basics. They didn't do this with their foot, ever. So that's there. Then there's the person who's been doing a bunch of stuff and won't give up the fact that they won't stop running 10 miles a day and heel striking in thick shoes. And they're like, my feet still hurt. Or are they getting better? Okay, good. As long as we're trending up 1% a day, that's okay. We'll get there because there's trade-offs people have to make. And that's the whole negotiation you have with pain inside of your body. So all that saying, it's variable. The other aspect is the one that you want, because it's the clear number, is the tissue, the material tissue. So the fascia, the remodeling, which is really the fascia is the encasements, the sausage casing that wraps our entire body. That is what gives us our endoskeletal structure. It was gives us our it provides the plyometric dynamic support, allows us to be explosive. That takes anywhere from 3 to 6 months, usually 3 to 4 months to remodel. So you have a consistent movement stimulus, the body will do it, but you have to have time under tension, so a lot of volume, and you have to have tension. So time and tension, so volume and load. If you don't have both of those, meaning a range, you have to get the tension to pull and remodel and open up the tissue to stretch everything out. And you have to load that under. So technically, the time under tension happens in 2 different ways. If I should, this is a little more advanced, but you have to have the stretched out long elastic stuff like a plastic bag or a shirt you can pull and restore that tissue. You start to pull, and this is where foam rolling comes in, potentially needling, cupping, all this stuff like the rolfing, where you're pushing and you're pulling and you're using this manual work to kind of get the tissue to like unbind. It's got stiff and stuck, and you're using your body to pull. It releases hyaluronic acid in between the layers of fascia that hydrates the tissue. That starts to restore range of motion. It's why you feel good after yoga or after a great massage or all that stuff, because you just pump some blood and hyaluronic fluid back to that. That's one piece. Once you've restored the range of motion, you open yourself up, you have to condition that tissue. So, for example, let's just say you have leather that you condition it, which is you cut it off the animal. I'm assuming there's like a removal of fur. You have to restore it. You stretch it. You dry it. Well, guess what? Now you have to condition. You have to beat it in. You have to work it. And so that is plyometrics, rhythmic, repetitive movements. Dancing, walking, running, jumping, throwing, swinging, hanging, carrying, like crawling, like things that are left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, like bouncing over and over and over again. You get hundreds and thousands of reps to condition the tissue. That's how you see this bouncy, jump roping, skipping, these kind of things that are like very intuitive movements that are all in this kind of like, I don't have to think about it because when I dance, it's just part of the music. When I run, it's just there's an inner metronome that happens. That's how you change it. So the other part of the question is, the fascia will remodel in 3 to 6 months if you give it the stimulus, if you have the relative strength to be able to bounce on the ground, if you have the overall consistency to move and get your feet out of overall space. Most people, this is the other reason I moved into like a 12-month process, is that people would go and do it, and some people would say, oh my God, I feel amazing. I can't believe I feel so much better after the first day of whatever you call it, like moving my feet. That's great. First step, you started to restore and get tissue. You took the pressure off the system. That's good. But they never see full resolution, which to me means you can run and you can jump without pain. And with fear. Pain and fear are really closely related. That takes time. Well, that means you have to work on your body composition. So you can't be super heavy. You have to have a certain level of consistent strength training that you can develop this tissue all the way from your feet, your ankles to your knees, your hips, and your spine. That's part of the process too. And then you need to work to actually do that stuff. A big thing I realize is people don't know how to skip. They're too afraid of rolling. They can't roll. They can't bend their spine, so they're afraid of falling. They don't leave the ground. They don't jump. They don't run. So guess what? You're not going to do any of those things if you're afraid. So there's a whole program I put together, which is, this is how you sit on the ground. This is how you stand. This is how you walk. This is how you skip. This is how you throw. This is how you catch. This is how you use your eyes. It sounds so simple, but people skip this. They either had it and got injured and lost it. Or they never had it because no one ever told them they could be athletic, and all they did was play video games. And so that process right there gives them the framework and the confidence, which is huge, the emotional confidence to do the thing. And as an athlete, those are things that you probably just take for granted. You're like, oh, what do you mean you don't jump? Or like, what do you mean what do you mean you're afraid of heights? You're not going to jump off a 40-foot diving board. I don't know what height you do, you crazy stuff. But there's an underlying fear around people are disconnected from their body. So how long does it take? Well, we can make some amazing things happen, but it depends on your background and what you're willing to do. And if you're capable of conditioning the tissue we just opened up, that's where you can start to see it. And then the last caveat of that is, what does it mean to get back to sprinting? Probably take a year. Get back to running pain-free, if you're, depending on where you're starting from, anywhere from 3 to 6 months. But if you're already at a good spot and you just neglected some basic things, like I could get you to a point where you are very healthy and moving 2 to 3 weeks, very simple. But it depends on what you want to do for that. So you'd be amazed at how quick, I guess, to answer that whole thing, if you just want to clip it, you would be really amazed at how fast people can heal, even in spite of the fact that they've suffered from difficult things for years. And you also can be amazed at how difficult it is to make people will make huge jumps and then get stuck at something and get stuck there like at 1% for months, weeks, because it's like there's a mental thing too. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, well, actually, funny enough, I think maybe it was a bad question, but you answered it thoroughly and eloquently enough to where I actually wouldn't want to clip something like that, because going through that whole story is kind of beautiful, because you are describing such a nuanced thing. Like you can't give me a basic answer, and maybe that would show that you don't really know what you're talking about if you just gave me oh yeah, it's 12 months or it's a 2 month
If you're buying
journey.
my program, it's 28 days.
Yeah.
like, like it's tough because in some sense, the reason I know how to answer that question is because that is what shoe should I buy and how long will it take are the two most common questions, and that's okay. But that's to me as someone who has afforded themselves a little more time to play, so to speak, like writing
Mm.
and really thinking this out. I'm like, why do we all think this way? Where does this come from? And that's where I'm interested, because I both understand what it's like to be in pain and on that side, and also to be the person that gets asked that. And I'm like, we're all making the same basic cognitive difference, and it's like if you meet somebody that's so for example, when you were paying, okay, let's just say if your pain being at worst is at a 10, and in your history, I'm not saying like what it could have been, but like when it was at a 10, where would you say you're at now? Like a 5, 4, 3, 6, 7?
uh for my niece specifically,
Yeah, sure.
a one, a zero, one
Okay,
or a zero.
but there was a time where you would have said there was a 10, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Okay, where you get to is at some point you become pain. So pain is operates. So pain doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. For example, we often think of like tissue injury and irritation as pain, and it's ouchie, it's a bad thing. But pain is any type, because how do you define pain? You can't measure it, you can't quantify it. So therefore, it escapes the ability to say, oh, pain is like dopamine. It's like, well, no, it's not, because it's like pain is a very unique thing, because pain isn't correlated to tissue abnormality. It's not like you could say that back looks weird because it's got a disc bulging, but oh wait, it doesn't hurt. It's weird. And so pain, I've come to define it as any distracting stimulus in life. It could be pleasure. Someone comes up behind you and tickles you. Ooh, like it pulled your attention away from what you're thinking to now I'm here. So pain literally centers you in life. It could be a pleasure. It could be something that feels really good, feels really bad, makes you feel nauseous, makes you feel anxious. All of these things are pain because they go, I'm here floating around airy fairy and back in life. That's pain. And so specifically, when we focus on the pain industry, is pain of like, I can't do the thing I want to do, and every time I try to do it, I'm reminded. Every time I'm thinking, so for example, you want to go do a dive. You're on the edge of the board. That is an entirely conceptual thing until it happens. But in order for you to happen, you kind of have to like take your brain out of it. You have to like you put yourself in a space. You plan. You think I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna have a quarter turn here. I'm gonna focus on this. When I get to that, I'm gonna go here. And at some point, once you do it, you're not thinking. You've done the work again, the discipline so many times that you just do it and it emerges. That's the magic of the whole thing. I think is amazing. So the skill part, which is you just kind of do something slow, smooth, and smooth is steady, and that's like slow is smooth, smooth is fast kind of thing. Amazing how that works. That's your process. And you think you're conceptual, you're thinking, I'm gonna do this, you're breathing, you're in a spot, you're relaxing, you're doing all this stuff, you're kind of like processing these things, but it's all in an effort to conceptually prepare your body. So like, there's a piece where you're centering yourself, you're trying to remove yourself from that, and all of a sudden, pain. Oh, my knees, and then that takes you out of that like flow state, which the flow state ideally, so there's at first there's a conceptual what you're planning to do, but the better you get at doing it, you get more in this flow state, which is like the state of non-being. You're both being and non-being, which is I don't know who's here, but it happened, and probably your best dives are when you almost dissociate. You're fully embodied, but you're not there, and you just finish, and the thing happened, and it's like I don't know how that's amazing, but it's the merger of this bodily presence and this conceptual spirituality, the material and spiritual come together, and like you are the isness. The thing that takes you out of the being too conceptual is overthinking. That will ruin your life. But that's where you have to start to kind of learn stuff. But being too much in your body doesn't let you have some type of like too much in your body, meaning it's like you're fixated on one aspect at the exclusion of the other pieces. So my knee hurts, but I'm not thinking about all the other pieces going on. And so pain like disrupts this thing. So when I'm trying to be in this flow state, which is this presence of like I am connected in my body, I'm just present, I'm here. Pain is throwing me off. So that's why we don't like pain. Even if it's positive, you're like, this is not what I want right now, unless it's consensually you're working in that direction. So, but there's levels to this stuff. Point is, that pain can be so disruptive to your life that it causes you to negotiate with yourself. And there's probably times you almost wanted to give up. You wanted to quit. You're like, I don't know if I can do this anymore. And I can't get injured. I want to, like, whatever it is. The craziest ideas will pop into your head. I want to put nitroglycerin or whatever, the packs on my knees. Like, where does that come from? Like the negotiations that happen internally as you talk to the pain. You're not talking to your body, you're talking to the pain, which the pain is its own entity. And I want it to go away. You get frustrated, you get mad, you get sad, you get angry, you get hopeful, you get just depressed. The range of emotions that go on in this experience, that is the experience that is not quantifiable. You can't sit there and say, yeah, that makes sense because his brain's doing that or that. It's like, no, it's just like, I don't know what that is, but that's crazy. And so once you start to understand that, you can then put a voice to it and work with people on this, like, where are you negotiating? Because when you look at something like, I've had those experiences with my shoulder. I dislocated my shoulder 11 times and like dozens of subluxations. And so, you start to get rid of like, okay, well, maybe I won't try this and maybe I won't do that. And you give up things. And it's like the idea of healing. It's like we sell ourselves so short when we think of this as an epoch, like an episode of life, or like, oh, I'm going to heal. And then it's like, good. But like, it's the quintessential doctor says, all right, I'm going to do knee surgery. You're going to be good. We're going to replace your knee. You're fine. And you can get back to life. As long as you don't ski, run, jump, walk the dog, run too fast, go uphill, go downhill, sit down too fast, stand up. It's like, wait, I thought the point of doing this was to get back my life. But we have, at that point, you've negotiated so much with your life. You've given up so much of who you think you could be that you're like, well, you know what? Being able to live life without pain, but I can't do the thing I love is better than, I don't know. It's crazy, but we become like drug addicts that are trying to solve this thing, and it's tough. So you really start to see this thing, and like part of the healing process is both addressing the existential crisis of the moment and also inspiring them. It's like I can educate you to this stuff, but as we go through this, true healing for me with my shoulder is I can do jujitsu and I actually did this thing, and true healing for me is being able to hang upside down and let my arms hang. True healing for me is being able to throw my arm to catch a ball with my left hand, not worry about it coming out, and not even thinking about it, not even not worrying, not thinking, oh, I did that, because I've had it go where I threw my arm out and it came out. It's like true healing for me is being able to sit up in bed without worrying about my shoulder coming out of the socket. True healing for me is being able to sprint and not even think. I didn't even think about my hamstring getting hurt or my foot spraining, whatever it is. It's true healing is the essence of being without having to think. In a sense, it's like I'm just back in my body, and that seems like a pipe dream for people, especially once you're at this place of like, you would have been at the top, like, oh, if I could just even be able to get through practice and, with just a little bit of pain, like that would be great. It's like, you can't even think about what it's like to just be fully present. I'm going to jump, not just like, I'm going to jump so high off. Like that's the arc of this discovery that happens when you go through pain. And it's so much deeper. It's so simpler. It's so much simpler than it people want to make it, which is like just move your toes. But it can also be so much more complex and deep with the experience side. So I constantly, it's very hard for me to live one side or the other, because I see one, I'm like, well, but this is this, and but then there's that. Anybody that will argue and say, well, pain is all just in your mind, you have to think it away. It's like, yeah, but then you have to pair that to a real thing. Anyone that just says, oh, you have to move your toes or do this product. Yeah, but what about, that's my brain all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's funny that you bring that up, because I couldn't connect with that more. At some point when the knees were getting, substantially stronger, it was like almost convincing. I would watch people jump off the platform. Most of our platforms are cement, by the way. So it's like, I'm watching someone jump off and I myself I'm like, oh, yep. Like I can feel it physically. And then it's just, your mind is just it's so much stronger than we really perceive. And so it's like, you really have to not just heal the body, but heal the mind at the same time, because, you're going to walk up into whatever sport realm you're in, and your mind's going to start to like pull you away from what you could actually do now that you have like the physical like capacity to do it. Yeah. So it's a crazy experience. And I've been currently going through that all over again.
Yeah. So this is what I'm saying, like the things that are most interesting to you. So what's going on? So because I had a few interesting ideas, kind of what I thought you said. So what's going on? What's bothering you right now? Like what's causing you issues?
You would, I guess I'm going to expose myself to everyone, but this is actually pretty funny. It's the least athletic thing I've ever done in my life. So my knee pain, I would say as of right now, is just not present. No knee pain. But I just came back to training after this summer break, we'll call it, and I'm stepping out of my apartment. I'm wearing sandals. Don't shoot me, but I'm wearing sandals. I just don't really know where the floor is. And I primarily like 98% wear barefoot shoes. This was the one time that I'm not saying it necessarily, this is the reason why I got hurt, but I step out of my apartment sideways on my foot. And I have like this space between the floor and my apartment door. I step sideways on my foot and I sprain my fifth metatarsal. I just stepped down like completely sideways. Yeah, it was just like boom. And so that takes its time to heal, and we do all those things. And so I get back to diving, and what you start to see, if you see me diving, usually we're just in one plane of motion. I'm just flipping in this spot. And you see me start to shift because I'm starting to compensate because my foot hurts. If I put pressure on my right foot, I'm like, shit. So I start to compensate. What ends up happening is my right foot heals, and now I have shin splints in my left foot, in my left shin. And then, so the left shin splints are starting to get better, but then it moves to the right. And so now all I'm dealing with is getting back to diving, and I'm, addressing the shin splints. And so that's, it was funny. I was talking to my strength coach, who's also a mentor of mine, and he kind of said something similar to you. It's, pain is not always bad. It might just be an indicator that something is changing within the body. It's just like hey, hello, something. This doesn't mean it's bad, but
uncertainty, newness.
Yeah, and so like my knees felt better, and the funny part, even with the foot healing, I was punching way harder on the platform, on the cement, because I was like, fuck yeah, this doesn't hurt. Like, let's get after it. And lo and behold, I have this chink in my armor, and so it starts to bring out these issues. And so I've just been working with shin splints as of recently. That's my issue.
Yeah. So ironic thing, the chink in your armor is like the whole point. Achilles had his tendon. So like, I think that the mythology behind that is that like, the fairy tale that you're perfect, like that you'll never have issues or is challenging. Are you, because there's a few valuable nuggets I think are value that I've already isolated here, but are you doing cross training outside of that, like other than strength work? But I mean, I typically like strength work is like squat, deadlift, lunge, like pretty straight and plain. Are you doing like running? Or are you doing any type of like sprinting or plyometric stuff, like dry land as you would call it?
Yeah. So I mean, we have our dry land training, but I was starting to ease into working sprint training, funny enough. And then that got taken away from me because I sprained the foot, and then I started easing back, and we started introducing like light jump rope, but then the shin splints just kind of exploded on me. So
yeah, shin splints, you'd be surprised how quickly you can address that. So I will send you the foot programs free, but I will send that to you, and you can work through that. But again, see how much easier that makes my life, and then you'll feel indebted to me, and it's great. So a few things to note. So the sandals aren't necessarily. I'm a huge fan of Shama sandals because typically what I don't like about sandals and flip flops is they don't have something that wraps around the heel. So typically, if you think about if you catch a ball, which I have a ball. I literally have like 6 balls near at all times. I'll find a different size ball, a smaller one. If you catch a ball, you reach up, you grab it. So notice that the fingers are spread to maximize surface contact, and then they close. So I grab it.
Yep.
Every step you take, you reach with your feet and you grab the ground. Your toes spread. Now, if you have something that wraps around your foot entirely, then your toes can spread. And if you don't, your toes have to pinch together to hold the thong or the part of the flip-flop together, and so they don't fall off. And again, I'm not saying this is what happens, but it's an interesting thing where if you're stepping and then your foot is looking for that, but it has to hold on to the shoe, you can make a fist. And so, for example, if you try to move your fist left and right, like if you hold a fist or you pinch your fingers together, this is more accurate, but if you pinch your fingers together and try to move left or right, you're going to notice that there's a limited range of motion here because you're holding tension in your forearm. So that's where you start to see a localization of that pressure. Sometimes things can just happen. The other thing I've noticed is interesting, especially in my own injury and experience with injury, is that, so for example, last year, the first time I was doing like hurdle jumps and sprints, and I'm like, this is like Monday. I'm doing hurdle jumps and sprints, and I feel great. I'm moving. Wednesday, I go for a run with Mark, and I'm talking like I'm at a barely above it's barely above a walk. You're very slow, plodding along. And then I'm halfway through, I'm looking for Mark and I can't find him. All of a sudden, pop, some of my cat goes. I'm like, I was just doing full effort sprints and jumping over hurdles and plyometrics, tricks, and this is when it happens? I find that there's almost not always, because there's plenty of evidence to the contrary. I find that like these injuries happen when we can afford to have them happen, meaning it's safe enough that it's just so nonsensical. It's like, why did this happen? This makes no sense. Like, I do so many other things. Like, you would think that would happen when you jump, but if, like, whatever. And not always, but I do find that those are the things that are interesting. So there's two parts of this, which is, one is it uncovers a bias, which is a lot of lateral stuff because you're moving in certain areas. So like low level, like it didn't have to be jump roping, because I think sometimes jump roping can be hard because you're like having to work on the skill. But low level, like balancing, for you, even just jumping without leaving the ground, there's a million things you can start to work on. But there is so much that happens if you think about your feet. And I'd also say that this runs up into the knee issue. Like this is not, there's no way that the ankle and the shin splints, we have to look at is the top of the foot is the dorsal structure of the foot that runs up on the front of the shin. So what we know is the tibialis anterior posterior. The tib is like the hot muscle of the day right now, or for the last year or two, thanks to Ben Patrick. But you lift up, there's a whole set of tissues that lift the foot up. But there's a set of tissue around the front of the ankle called the retinaculum that holds it, like a seatbelt that holds it down. Now, one thing I've been exploring with is we can do knuckle push-ups. So if you put your hands on the ground and you do push-ups and knuckles, if you couldn't support that, it'd be a problem, right? That'd be weird because like we were strong enough and we can hold that. The same thing happens with your feet. If you can tuck your toes underneath and put pressure through the top of your foot, basically what happens is you have strength through the bottom of your feet. Like my fiance, she's the gymnast, they teach the girls to do it, but she can walk on the top of her knuckles. I can do it too, but not as well. And so there's a strength there. And then you start to look at like, the top of the foot and top of the ankle are so stiff. Most people focus on ankle range of motion with that, like the wall test where they push the knee forward and want to get that ankle dorsiflexion, and that's great. There's a part of that that's good and whatever. But they never think about ankle extension, and they might think about ankle extension if they lay on the ground. But that's can you point your toes? Now, if you can't, for example, let's say if you don't have strength there because you're lacking strength in the tibialis, and so that's part of it. You have to have the short range where you get the muscle dominant strength, but then you have to have. So as we mentioned earlier with the fascia, you have to pull and stretch and open it up. You can do all the muscle stuff in the world because muscles contract, they pull in. But if you don't counter that with working on the sausage casing, so to speak, like let's just say your sausage gets really dense and you're like pulling it in and you contract it, it makes it really small. You also have to stretch and condition and open that tissue up because then otherwise that fascia gets dehydrated. That gets stiff. That constricts and pulls all the 28 bones of the foot together and localizes pressure at one spot. So then you have, I stepped weird and that hurt. So what you realize, it feels like that injury, but it's a sign of some aspect of my foot, ankle, lower leg is not getting the motion. And that is causing the fascia to constrict. And just like a t-shirt or a sweatshirt that's shrinking, if you imagine if you put a sweatshirt on and then had someone vacuum seal the air out, it would slowly kind of constrict and pull your body in. That would be what's happening. We don't feel this, but then slowly my bones aren't gliding well. My tissue's not moving well. My joints aren't articulating. And then all of a sudden I step and it's weird and boom, whoa, that was weird. That's what happens. And so you have to look at there can be no issue. So, there's some place where in most people it's the big toe. So their toes are lacking full extension. And sometimes it's flexion. But typically, I think the big toe extension is the biggest thing that most people miss, the second biggest thing most people miss, and the most things is the top of the foot. So you know what a split squat is? You probably it's basically where you are standing, instead of doing a squat, one foot goes in forward, one foot goes in back. It's not the ATG split squat where you're really far off, and it's not a Bulgarian split squat where the rear foot elevated split squat. Yep. But just imagine a split squat. So you're basically doing a lunge. It's a lunge. Now imagine doing a lunge, and then instead of having the back foot with the toes down, put the top of the foot on the ground. Push through the knuckles of the toes. Push through the top of the ankle. And you start to realize that feels really stiff. Now, if you think one joint up from the front of the ankle is the knee. Now, all of that tissue. So imagine you're wearing a onesie and it's shrink wrapped to your body. So you have your footy is part of the wrap around your foot, and then all that same tissue, the same stretch of fabric that runs from the top of the toes will go to the front of the knee, and that goes to the hip flexor. That, just like the posterior chain, we know that the bottom of the foot is connected to the plantar fascia, is the same tissue that connects to the Achilles tendon, which is the same tissue that wraps around the calves, which is the same tissue that wraps around the hamstrings, which is the same tissue that wraps around the glutes and goes to the lower back, the upper back, and the neck. That's why if you do a Jefferson curl, or if you look down, if you try to stretch your toes and touch your toes and you curl your head and look down, it feels like a deeper stretch. Why is that? Because all the tissue is connected. The same thing happens on the front of the body. The top of the toes, the knuckles of the toes, so to speak, the top of the foot, the top front of the ankle, the front of the shin, so this shin splints or tibialis issue, goes to the knee. Now, if you've historically had the tibial tuberosity, which is where your knee, the quadriceps, patellar and quadriceps tendon attach, that is like typical Osgood Schlatter stuff, or patellar tendonitis, or quad tendonitis, any of those things, or tight quads, tight hips. If you've historically had that, you know that you already have part of this tissue that's feeding down. And that might be lateral. And one of the things I'm playing around with is a lot of this rotation. So if your IT band, quote IT band, your IT band should always be tight. But if the tissue that includes that, which is your glutes and your TFL, your tensor fate latae, the hip flexor, part of the hip flexor in the front, glutes are on the back, those muscles converge together along with the vastus lateralis, which is the outside portion of your quad, the muscle in the front. Those converge together and they form the IT band and the set of fascial tissue that runs down to the lateral part of your knee, which then wraps around with, that's where you get the meniscus and LCL are connected in there as well. That wraps around the outside of your shin. So your fibularis, your peroneal fibers that wrap around the outside of your ankle, and those attach to the fifth metatarsal. So when you load the ankle improperly, they pull. You strain that tendon. You strain the bones. You get a Lisfranc strain, Lisfranc fracture. You get some type of neuroma or issue. That's where and so that takes away your ability for your pinky toe to spread and push into the ground. That means you're no longer putting force evenly on both sides, and that starts to load the inside of the ankle. The ankle bone on your left side, so your opposite side, is now collapsing in. And that's putting pressure over and over and over again and pulling on the tendons, your flexor, your big toe flexor, your little toes flexor. So there's a big flexor that's inside the foot, and then a flexor that runs from the big toe and the little toes all the way up behind the ankle, along with your posterior tibialis, and that runs and attaches on the inside, that little meaty spot where I was saying you massage on the inside of that tibia. Ooh. Now you start to realize it's not the massage. You have to start to fix the massage, get tissue, and that's good. But you also have to engage that left big toe and left foot to engage the arch. And then you have to hold that position, have strength relative to your body weight for hundreds or thousands of little baby plyometrics. Bounce, 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 bounce. That's how the whole thing starts to work. And so you see, you can wrap around the body, which is what could be a stiffness at the big toe, or a stiffness at the top of the foot, goes up to the knee, that affects the hip, and it just, you get the circle of the body. But that's kind of this kind of piece where it's like, I don't need to explain the whole thing to you. I just need to figure out where is it stiff, and let's work on that. And by working on the stiffness and then plugging it back into basic movement, you start to have a resolution in this stuff that people just seem like, oh, I tried, cortisone shots and orthotics and didn't help. It's because you didn't take the stiffness off the system. The pressure is still there. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, it's like putting a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound. Like the problem's still there. I definitely recognize that the issue for me personally, if we're just gonna look at my whole little issue, was and we've been playing with it, but it like my big toe is just locked. Like being able, when you explain like being able to like move your toes, and like I've been very adamant about like utilizing like the yoga toes, or like trying to like use toe spacers to make sure that I can actually start to like open up and utilize my toes, because they've been so constrained for so long. And then, working on some balance work to where it's like I am feeling like the burn in the bottom of my foot, but the big toe is not great at moving. And so we've been doing some like banded movements to like start to get some movement in there, but it's frustrating. I want to bang my face against the wall because it's such a simple little thing, but it's hard. It's hard.
I think you're barking. That's a good start, so it's not bad, but I think you're barking up the wrong tree. So I'm going to give you two things I think are valuable. One is I don't use toe spacers. I've never really used them. I don't. People can do them, and it's helpful to get people started, and that's fine. But first off, the toe spacers are like finger spacers. Like I could take my fingers and spread them apart, but that's not what matters. The metatarsals, or the metacarpals in the hand, I want this part. So like, for example, that could be if all of the meaty tissue, it's easy to spread when there's already space between the digits. What's hard is this tissue in between the long bones that make up the meat of the hand. That right there is what gets stiff. That right there, when you hold this together years, you haven't moved that. You don't have this pliable, like you can make a fist and you can like, if someone does a handshake and they squeeze your knuckles together, you want some play. You want some motion there. You want the hand to be able to, if the hand can't hold tension, but it also can't like move and articulate to kind of offset some force. If it's too rigid, you want like a shock system of a car. If it's too stiff, the thing breaks. But if it's bouncing, the whole thing can kind of move and there's some articulation of the wheels. That's what you want. So toe spacers are fine, but they tend to be more of an aesthetic fix because they just do this. And your earning range of motion, you have no idea what to do with. So that's there. The other part is what really matters is the metatarsals, meaning the bones in the middle. So what I would really focus, and what I've been focusing on, is I call them metatarsal spread. So you focus. It seems like semantics at first, but it makes a difference. Instead of toe spreads, you do metatarsal spread, where you focus on pulling the foot. So like if you could take your hand and think about pulling the knuckles, like the base of the knuckles, so like the actual hand, and pulling that apart. It seems silly, and it's not going to happen much at first. So intermetatarsal massaging in between the actual bones is really valuable. And also, find a ball, step on it, and wrap those metatarsals around. Like you really have to like wrap around that. That's really, really valuable. So there's a piece of that. There's what's called so you have your medial longitudinal arch, which is the arch that people want to talk about. The lateral longitudinal arch, which is on the outside from your fifth pinky toe to your base of your heel. That's the other one that matters. So those create kind of like the height. But then there's a transverse arch that runs from the ball of the pinky toe to the ball of the big toe. That's what you have to restore. And so when you look at the toes that can't curl underneath, that's you start to run into issues. And so the way you start to do that is you start to grab something and you literally pick things up with your foot. You grab like a lacrosse ball or something that fits the span of your ball. These are Jill Miller's Yoga Tuna balls, which are compressed rubber. I love them. But you grab it, but you're really trying to pinch in between this, because what you want to do is restore the curvature, this cupping of the foot. So the cupping in the hand, see how a healthy hand has this kind of cupping in there?
Yep.
A healthy foot would have the same piece, but we're always flat on the ground. So there's different geometry there. But so that's one piece. The other thing is restoring that big toe mobility, especially the extension, is really difficult because that stuff gets stiff. And I'm talking, you need to go and you need to do I would do rear foot elevated split squats with the big toe on the ground. The biggest issue with the rear foot elevated split squat is you lose the big toe extension. You have to put the big toe down and then pin it down, meaning you push it into the ground and then you pull the foot away. So basically you're pushing your big toe into the ground and then you're holding that down by like pushing downward pressure and then pulling the foot away to kind of create a gap. And then you lower down into a split squat. That is so uncomfortable because you are really loading and you just hold on to something and start with hold on to something, take the weight off and just ease into it and pulse. I'm talking like this is 20, for you, 20 plus years of never loading that big toe in full range of motion. There's a guy, Gador Ziani, who I love. He's the godfather of dunk.
Yeah.
I didn't realize big toes, and this is when I realized I had an issue, is because I'm the foot guy, the barefoot sprinter. I'm doing all this stuff, and I'm like, my big toes, they don't feel great if I have them at 90 degrees. Or like even at 70 degrees. And I was like, I got some issues there. So again, going back to the basics. But I remember I saw this guy, he's so mobile. And he spends so much time on the ground, which is why I'm sitting on the ground. I try to sit for hours a day on the ground because it's super valuable because you're moving all the time. I'll put like something like a foam roll or something under my hips just to keep moving around. But that's why I keep shifting all the time.
Yeah.
But his big toes are just, I've never seen something that completely bent back. It was like your thumb. For example, you think of your thumb as like, if you couldn't pull your thumb back to 90 degrees, you'd have an issue. Like people get stuck. I saw a woman who she gets so stressed, her hands got stuck like this, meaning her thumb was like folded across. And, that's kind of what happens. And so over time, you lose the capsule, the ability for the big toe to move. I'm telling you, it is working into your strength training, but put that big toe under load and ease into it. But that is a huge thing because what you realize is all through those toes. So what you can do are full toes. If you have a slant board or some type of incline, you can put the toes on there and do a reverse slant board full toe splay squat where you push the toes, you squat down, and your goal is to get as much extension to those toes as possible, and you drive the knees forward. You have to search out the areas of like really uncomfortable tension in your toes. If you hold your weight and do it after you've warmed up, do some sled pushes and stuff, it makes a huge difference. That like there is just some really uncomfortable stuff that does not happen with toe spacers, and it's a different direction, different plane of motion. That with focusing on some tip raises, not just, you'll see these in the program, it's not just straight up tip raises, but also posterior tip raises. The posterior tibialis pulls the bottom of the foot up. So if you just do tip raises, you're not differentiating between the big toe extensor, the little toes extensor, and the tibialis. But if you relax the toes and then pull the foot up, but the inside, like you kind of cup the inside, that's the posterior tibialis runs from the inside of your shin behind the ankle to the middle of the bottom of your arch. That is pulling the inside up. So you can think about orienting your foot differently to get different muscles engaged. It seems overwhelming and complex at first. That's why the program's there to kind of walk you through these basic steps. Yeah. But point is, these things should happen naturally if you're doing multi-directional agility, playing around the field, doing some cones. I go out to the, before I do any running now, I take a soccer ball out and run around some cones and dribble the ball around and work on juggling because it just works on different parts of the foot. It's a lot right there. But I do think you're missing some big toe extension, almost certainly on both sides, but definitely on the left side, and that's what's leading to shin splints. You start to really work on that, like in a really uncomfortable way, and really open that up. That will make some real change. You pair that with almost too easy. The other thing I would say is get back into diving, but it's like, how do you make diving so stupidly easy that it's not even like jumping from the side of the pool? Like that is not like, go back to the basics of the basics of the basics. Meaning, when I couldn't do the sprinting last year, and this is obviously different. I'm not, at a high level like you are, but it's fundamentally, directionally, it's the same. When I couldn't sprint, what I always started to go back is I can just skip. So I skipped, and I would skip back and forth. I work on different patterns of skipping, and I realized, I realized I wasn't even I was hitting contact with my heel too high as opposed to like a really like heel just off the ground, but I usually went back to the basics of the basics that I couldn't do the thing I loved as fast as I wanted to or as well as I wanted to, but because I was injured, it gave me an excuse to do the stupid level thing, the drills you might do for like a 5-year-old that wants to learn how to dive. And those are the kind of things where you discover something new. Mm-hmm. And in this, you can, to create a long psychological arc of it, in this, you can say, you look back and say, I figured out a new trick or a new movement because everyone else is trying to do the hardest, biggest thing, but people overlook the simplest thing, and you find like, I could do this, and I could bring that in. They might, maybe not, but every time I've had an injury thing, is my body saying that if there's something great to happen, almost always happens by happenstance, and you might explore something in a way that you just, as a stupid analogy, this is like the tag that holds the clip in. It's a bobby pin. I've worn this tank at least 20 times, and it's still in there. The thing that you overlook, I was just feeling like, why this could have poked me. It's got a little bobby pin. Like, I don't know how I didn't get taken out the first time. But when you go back and you are just forced to deal with the substrate of the very the minutia, you discover something new, and it gives you a new purpose in this. So like now you're going into training, not just like, last thing I'll say, because I know whatever, it's recorded, so I can't help it. This is the way I am. When you get in healing mode as an athlete, you go into a different mode. And I see this all the time, which is I'm 100% back. I'm ready to get back after it. I'm almost at full speed. I cannot tell you how many people DM me this, but also in my own coaching experience, there was the time where before injury, which was the good old days, where I didn't have to think about this stuff. I could just work hard. I was fucking savage. I went after it. And there will be the time when I get over this thing that'll be there. The problem is you're not in the same mind space. You're not in an Olympic champion mind space right now because I'm healing, I'm in rehabilitation mode, I'm not working on stuff, I'm at 80%, and you juxtapose it with a little bit of like I'm working on this, but I'm still have this injury. And there's a different affect, there's a different energy, there's a different psychology. Everything about you is different because you're not in competition. You don't think of yourself as dangerous or at the highest level. That will sink you more than anything else. You have got to find a way to show up at 100% and you're still in the hunt. Every single day you go in there, and people can make this, but I'm not saying you're not doing this, but I'm saying broadly for people, the biggest mistake I see in the injury rehabilitation spot is that they get stuck in this level of like, I'm like, I have to caveat everything. I have to like pre-qualify everything. Don't do that to yourself. Find a way you can go in and be 100% like, you're not healing. You're going to make you work on these things. It's part of the healing thing, but don't, the greatest stories in the Olympics, the woman who broke her foot on the vault and then she had to go do it again. It's like, you will have to perform. you're going to tell me that you do good, and the week before the Paris, and you're out there like, oh, my knees hurt. You got to like, you can do that. So this is part of the time where you don't deliberately work through pain. You don't deliberately hurt yourself, but you say, there's something to be learned here. That's why I'm saying there's so much value, and you scale back and say, this is stupidly easy, but there's something I'm working here. There's something to be learned here. And if you treat it as such, you will come away with something. And that can be the impetus for the greatest inspiration of something you never thought before. Really, really important.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a beautiful way to think about it. And I think I've been forced into staying in the mindset. We have our qualifiers coming up soon for World Championships. So it's maybe that's a lucky thing, because I've been training like, hey, I have no choice. I either, do these dives at our qualifier, or like I'm done. So I feel like I've been in the competitive mode of like, let's grind. Good. Like I'm going to walk in, I'm going to have to murder people if they like it or not. Yeah. If my shins like it or not.
The other side of that psychology, which is, it's not that the pain is the problem. It's the rumination, the worry, the anxiety of, is it going to hurt today? You wake up and like, okay, this is okay. Am I going to be able to do the thing? It's the uncertainty. That kills more people than anything else. But if you can get to this is the beauty of real athletes, because they really understand this, it's going to happen. So there is for the other side is, you will be done at some point. You will retire. You will be done running. So there is not, it's either this or I'm done. It's like, I will be done. So that's fine. But this is going to happen. Meaning, so for example, this is kind of more, but I've been thinking about this recently with the idea of we all die. Everything ends. We all die. And if life is so bad, you could kill yourself. And I'm not saying it's not a flippant way of saying it, but it's a reality of you always have options. And you will die at some point. So it takes away your ability to say, I'm so unhappy, I'm this. You have options. If you won't exercise those options, then understand that there's something else you're overlooking, you're playing victim. Then you can attack that and work on it. So once you accept the fact that it will end, but in this time I have this, there are certain things that are just going to happen. I don't have to bring the emotion of uncertainty and anxiety. I don't have to bring all the emotions to it. It's just, like you said, you're going to be there in Paris and it's going to happen. So show up and do it. And I'm not saying that there's an experience, but there's a resolution that happens. And this is it's a nuanced way to say this, because I know people can just clip this and say whatever. It's not that you overlook those things. It's that you, have you ever seen the movie Arrival? It's a great movie. I love it.
Fantastic.
So the point is, the aliens that come speak in a language that doesn't know time. So they don't do present and past tense. But when they learn to speak that language, the point is the main character learns to think like that. And so she starts to think as though her memories are not past. It's future. She's remembering things from the future. But her life, she can see the span of her life planned out. She knows what happened. She knows all the heartbreak and the happiness. And if you could think like that, if you could literally see the story of your life planned out, and you know that there's going to be heartbreak one day and certain aspects, and you know there's going to be triumphs, you would just be there in the moment without the extra buzz, without the extra messiness and fuzziness that's going on. You don't bring the uncertainty. This is going to happen. I'm going to be here, and I'm going to show up, and it's going to be there. And what you realize is that resolution of the resolution just to be here, because the beauty of the movie, the way the main character thinks, is there's no uncertainty about what's going to happen. You know what's going to happen. It's not oh, will my daughter be okay? It's in the movie, she dies of cancer. It's she's not going to be okay. But there's no uncertainty about it. And when there's no uncertainty about it, you don't have to bring the anxiety of what about this? What about that? It's not there. You just do. You are resolute, you are focused, you execute. And when you execute, you don't have to bring this waffling around uncertainty. And that's still that and almost, I can't think of a better thing for a diver, because there is a diver, it's probably a little harder than a sharpshooter or an archer. Everybody, gymnastics, if you're going to the vault, there's no room for thought. It's just by that point, the hay's in the barn, you have to do. And you get up there and you launch yourself off and it goes. And you have to the resolution, the practice, Simone Biles right now is unreal. I don't even know if she's a human anymore, the stuff she's doing. But if you look back at, her last Olympics and then all the stuff she had going on in Michigan, all that, or I don't know the specifics, but my point is at any one of those points, someone would criticize her, said it was stupid. She probably was why this, but she now realizes the value of that is that she did the work, and she's not even a human anymore. She just shows up when she's fine, she's happy, and then she gets on that and she goes. But you don't get that level of resolution without the constant trial and tribulation and the lessons you learn there. And you're in that part. And like for you to show up in 10 months, like you don't show up at your best self without this right now. So when you look at this and say, I'm gonna be there, it's gonna happen, there's no need to have anxiety about it, no need to have uncertainty. And not only is this stuff, necessary, it's also good. Like it's not only is this stuff happening, it's also good that it's happening because this is part of the training, emotionally, mentally, psychologically, spiritually. This is training you to be the highest level you're going to perform at, and that it wouldn't happen without that. And that's where you can bring gratitude to the grief. That's when you become unstoppable. It's just huge. So enough of that ramble, but
no,
yeah.
I love it. Actually, so we can kind of end it there because this kills me. We're gonna have to set up a part 2 if you like it or not because I think I touched like 2 questions that I wrote out. But I kind of love that that ending there. But it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. I've actually been following you for quite a bit. Some of the rehab that I've been doing has been based off of some of the knowledge that I've gotten from just watching you. So like instead of just doing the tib raises, I have been touching the big foot down or the big toe down. Yeah, like I got that from you. And so, it's been an absolute honor chatting with you, and we'll have to set up another time so we can run through the rest of these questions.
And for everybody listening, if you have any foot, ankle, lower leg issues, there's a free 28-day program where I go all this stuff. There's a book, there's an audiobook, there's a training. It's all free. The link in bio is at the Barefoot Sprinter on, I think it's like YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram, but the link in bio on TikTok and all that stuff. So it's free. It's there. Do it and fix yourself, and then we take a bigger journey together.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for your time, and I'm excited for our next chat.
I look forward to it.
All right. Cheers.